The winter wind carried more than cold across the New Mexico territory that February of 1883. It carried grit and sand that scoured the weathered boards of Abel McCrae's ranch house, finding its way through every crack and crevice like unwelcome memories. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, red rock mesas rising like ancient sentinels, scrub brush clinging stubbornly to alkaline soil, and vast expanses of nothing but dust and determination. Abel stood on his porch, coffee growing cold in his tin cup, watching the sun struggle through another dawn. At 34, he cut a solitary figure against the harsh landscape, tall and lean from years of hard work, hands scarred from rope burns and barbed wire, eyes the color of winter sky. The townspeople of Perdition respected him for his honesty and hard work, but they kept their distance. Something about Abel McCrae suggested depths better left unplumbed, sorrows better left unspoken. His ranch wasn't much to look at, 1,000 acres of scrubland good for little besides grazing longhorns. But it was his. He'd built it board by board after returning from the Apache Wars, after burying his mother and younger brother following the Comanche raid of '78. The house stood sturdy if plain. 3 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a porch that faced east toward the sunrise. It was a house built for function, not comfort, for survival, not dreams. The arrangement had been made through his late mother's cousin in Philadelphia, a proper match, they'd assured him, with a young woman of good family fallen on difficult circumstances, Eleanor Hargrave. They'd written, 26 years old, educated, willing to make a new life in the territory. The photograph they'd sent showed a woman with dark hair and serious eyes, her face turned slightly away from the camera, as if she were already looking west. Abel had met her stagecoach in Las Cruces 3 months prior. She'd stepped down in a traveling dress of deep blue wool, entirely impractical for the territory, carrying a single carpet bag and a small trunk. Her first words to him had been, "You must be Mr. McCrae," spoken in a voice that carried the precise diction of Eastern education. She hadn't smiled, but she'd offered her gloved hand with a dignity that made him suddenly conscious of the trail dust on his own clothes. The ride back to the ranch had been mostly silent. Eleanor sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll by with an expression Abel couldn't read. When they'd passed through Perdition, she'd observed the ramshackle buildings, the saloon, the general store, the dozen houses scattered like dice across the desert floor. "It's very open," she'd finally said, and something in her voice had made Abel wonder what she'd left behind. Their wedding had been a brief affair in the town's small church, witnessed by the shopkeeper and his wife. Eleanor had worn a gray dress with pearl buttons, her dark hair pinned severely back, when the minister pronounced them man and wife. Abel had kissed her cheek, a brief, awkward gesture that left them both looking away. That night, she'd retired to the small bedroom he'd prepared for her, closing the door with quiet finality. He'd slept on a bedroll by the fireplace, listening to the wind and wondering what he'd done. The first weeks had passed in careful choreography. Eleanor rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, biscuits and bacon, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. She kept the house with meticulous care, though Abel noticed how her fine hands soon grew rough from lye soap and well water. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire with her sewing or a book from the small collection she'd brought. While he worked on harnesses or studied his account ledgers, they spoke little beyond the necessities of daily life. "The gray mare has a split hoof," he might say. "I'll need to ride to town for supplies." And she would nod, adding, "We're low on flour and lamp oil." Their conversations were transactions, nothing more. But sometimes, in unguarded moments, Abel would catch her staring out the window at the endless horizon, her needle forgotten in her lap. Once, returning early from checking the herd, he'd found her standing in the yard, arms wrapped around herself despite the noon heat, tears cutting silent tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She'd turned away quickly when she heard his spurs, wiping her face with her apron. "The wind," she'd said, "it gets in your eyes." At night, the house felt too small and too large all at once. Abel would lie in his narrow bed, acutely aware of Eleanor in the next room, separated by only a thin wall of pine boards. Sometimes he heard her moving about, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of bedclothes. Once, what might have been muffled crying. The few times their hands had brushed, passing a dish at dinner, when he'd helped her down from the wagon, had left him restless for hours afterward. But she remained distant, polite but unreachable, like a guest who hadn't yet decided whether to stay. The town talked, of course. At the general store, Mrs. Hutchins would purse her lips when Eleanor came in for supplies. "How are you settling in, dear?" she'd ask, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. The men at the saloon would fall silent when Abel entered, their knowing looks following him to the bar. A mail-order bride was curiosity enough in Perdition. A mail-order bride who kept her husband at arm's length was prime gossip fodder. Abel tried not to care what they thought. But on Sundays, sitting beside Eleanor in church, close enough to smell the lavender soap she used but forbidden by propriety and their own strange distance from taking her hand, he felt the weight of every stare, every whispered speculation. One evening in late February, a norther blew in sudden and fierce. Abel had been out with the herd, and by the time he made it back to the house, ice crystals were forming in his beard. He found Eleanor standing by the window, watching the storm roll across the mesa. Without thinking, he crossed to stand beside her. "It's beautiful," she said softly, surprising him. "Terrible, but beautiful. First time you've seen a real norther?" She nodded. In Philadelphia, winter meant snow on cobblestones, carolers in the square. She gestured at the wild darkness beyond the glass. "This is something else entirely. It'll blow itself out by morning," he said. "Always does." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, for perhaps the first time since her arrival. "Is that what you tell yourself about everything out here, that it'll blow over by morning?" Before he could answer, she'd turned away, busying herself with laying out plates for supper. But something had shifted in that moment, some small crack in the wall between them. That night, the storm howled like all the demons of the desert. Abel woke to find Eleanor in the main room, wrapped in a shawl, feeding wood to the dying fire. "Couldn't sleep," she said without turning around. He joined her by the hearth, keeping a careful distance. The firelight played across her features, softening the lines of worry that had become habitual. "Eleanor," he began, then stopped, not knowing what he wanted to say. She looked at him, waiting. When he didn't continue, she said, "I know this isn't what you expected. A wife who acts more like a boarder than a bride." "I didn't have expectations," he said, which was both true and false. "Everyone has expectations." She pulled the shawl tighter. "You deserve better than a woman who came here running from something rather than towards something. We all got our reasons for being where we are." She studied him in the firelight. "What are you running from?" Abel McCrae. He thought of his mother's grave, his brother's laughter silenced forever, the weight of surviving when others hadn't. "Maybe I'm not running. Maybe I'm just standing still, waiting for life to catch up." Eleanor almost smiled, the closest he'd seen to one since her arrival. "Then we're quite a pair, aren't we? You standing still, me running in place." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Eleanor finally rose to return to her room, she paused with her hand on his shoulder, the briefest touch, there and gone like a promise or a prayer. 3 days later, Abel returned from a week-long cattle drive to find the house empty. Eleanor's trunk still sat in the corner of her room, but her carpetbag was gone. On the kitchen table, held down by the salt cellar, was a piece of her good stationery with a few lines in her careful script. "I must go. Please don't look for me. This is not your fault. You are a good man. Abel McCrae. Better than I deserve. E." Abel stood in the empty house, the note crumpling in his fist, while outside the wind began its evening song across the desert, carrying with it all the words they'd never said. Abel read the note 3 times before the words truly registered. Then he was moving, calling for his foreman. Saddling his fastest horse, he rode first to town, questioning the station master, the hotel clerk, anyone who might have seen her. The westbound stage had left that morning. They said, yes, a woman matching Eleanor's description had boarded alone, bought passage to Albuquerque. By the time Abel reached Albuquerque 2 days later, the trail had gone cold. Eleanor could have taken any of a dozen routes from there, east back to Philadelphia, south to Mexico, north to Denver. The ticket agent remembered her vaguely, kept her face covered, didn't say much, bought a ticket to Santa Fe, I think, or was it Tucson? Abel spent a week searching, checking hotels and boarding houses. But Eleanor had vanished as completely as smoke on the wind. He returned to the ranch hollow-eyed and trail-worn. The house felt like a tomb. Her presence lingered in small things, the curtains she'd sewn for the kitchen window, a hair ribbon forgotten beneath the bed, the faint scent of lavender in the bedroom he couldn't bring himself to enter. Word spread through perdition like wildfire. Abel's mail-order bride had run off. The theories multiplied with each telling. She had a lover back east. She'd been frightened by the harshness of ranch life. She'd gone mad from the isolation. At the saloon, Jake Morrison suggested with a leer that maybe Abel hadn't been man enough to keep her satisfied. Abel broke Jake's nose and 2 of his ribs before the other men pulled him off. Sheriff Watson let him sleep it off in a cell, more for his own protection than punishment. "Can't say I blame you," Watson said the next morning. "Unlocking the cell, but breaking heads won't bring her back." "Nothing will bring her back," Abel said, and the finality in his voice ended the conversation. Spring came early that year, turning the desert briefly green before the summer heat burned everything brown again. Abel threw himself into work, mending fences, breaking horses, driving cattle to market. He hired 2 Mexican hands to help with the ranch, partly for the work but mostly to avoid the empty house. At night, he'd sit on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, watching the stars wheel overhead and trying not to think about anything at all. But the memories came anyway. The way Eleanor had hummed while cooking, some melody he didn't recognize. How she'd insisted on learning to milk the cow, determined despite her obvious fear of the animal. The afternoon he'd found her teaching letters to the Hernandez children, using a stick to draw in the dust. Small moments that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but now felt precious as water in drought. Months passed. Summer's heat gave way to autumn's chill. Abel stopped looking up every time he heard horses on the road. He moved his belongings into the main house, though he still avoided the bedroom that had been hers. The town's gossip moved on to other scandals. The banker's daughter running off with a traveling salesman. A gunfight over water rights at the Morrison spread. Then came the dreams. Eleanor lost in a sandstorm, calling his name. Eleanor hurt, needing help, beyond his reach. He'd wake with her name on his lips, the taste of failure bitter in his mouth. The worst dreams were the ones where she simply stood at the window again, watching the horizon. And he knew with dream logic that if he could just find the right words, she would turn around and smile and stay. One night in October, unable to bear the empty house, Abel rode out to the canyon where he'd buried his family. The 3 wooden crosses stood weathered but straight, marking all that remained of his former life. He sat between his mother's and brother's graves, flask in hand, talking to the darkness. "I couldn't keep her safe either," he said to the crosses. "Couldn't even keep her here. What kind of man loses everyone he's supposed to protect?" The wind offered no answers, only the distant howl of coyotes. Meanwhile, 300 miles east, Eleanor struggled through the mountain passes on foot, her good shoes long since worn to tatters. She'd left the stage at Santa Fe as planned, but instead of continuing to safety, she'd made a fatal error in judgment. A man at the depot, well-dressed, speaking with an Eastern accent, had offered her passage with his private party heading to Denver. Desperate to put distance between herself and anyone who might know Abel, she'd accepted. The man's intentions became clear the first night on the trail. When Eleanor resisted his advances, he'd grown violent. She'd escaped while the camp slept, taking only what she could carry, fleeing into the wilderness. For days she'd wandered, lost among the pines and granite peaks, surviving on creek water and bitter roots. Her fine clothes were torn, her hands bleeding from climbing over rocks. When the fever came, she thought it was the end, collapsed beside a mountain stream, burning and shaking. She dreamed of Abel's house, the solid walls, the warmth of the fireplace, his quiet strength. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the stars. "I'm so sorry." The man who found her was himself a ghost of sorts. Caleb Sullivan had lived alone in the mountains for 7 years. Ever since the war, he'd built a cabin far from any trail, wanting only solitude and silence. But he couldn't leave a dying woman by the creek, no matter how much he'd forsworn human company. Caleb was 43, gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen too much. He'd been a Union officer once, before a Confederate prison camp and its horrors had broken something inside him. Now he lived by hunting and trapping, trading pelts twice a year in towns where nobody asked questions. He carried Eleanor to his cabin, tended her fever with willow bark tea and cool compresses. For 3 days she hovered between life and death, calling out for Abel in her delirium. Caleb learned her story in fragments: the arranged marriage, the fear that she was too damaged for love, the assault that had driven her into the mountains. When the fever finally broke, Eleanor woke to find herself in a strange bed, warm and clean. Caleb sat by the fire, whittling, giving her space to adjust. "You saved my life," she said when she could speak. "You saved your own," he replied. "I just helped a little." As Eleanor recovered, an understanding grew between them. Caleb never asked why she'd run from her husband, and she never asked about the nightmares that woke him screaming. They were two broken people who recognized the damage in each other. Winter arrived early in the mountains. Eleanor, still weak from her ordeal, couldn't travel. She helped around the cabin, cooking, mending, preparing pelts for trade. Caleb taught her to shoot, to read weather signs, to survive. They lived as companions. Nothing more, though sometimes Eleanor caught him looking at her with a loneliness that matched her own. "You should go back," he told her one night as snow fell thick outside. "Your husband, Abel, the way you call for him in your sleep. A man who inspires that kind of loyalty must be worth returning to." Eleanor stared into the fire. "I'm not who he thought he married. I'm not pure, not innocent. There are things in my past." She stopped, unable to voice the shame that had driven her west in the first place, the reason she'd accepted a marriage to a stranger. "We all got our demons," Caleb said quietly. "Maybe that Abel of yours has room for yours too." But before Eleanor could decide, fate intervened. She woke one morning violently ill, and with growing horror recognized the signs. The assault in the mountains had left more than just physical scars. Caleb found her sobbing by the creek, despite the danger of thin ice. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't bear this shame. Abel will never, he could never." "You don't know that," Caleb said firmly. "You haven't given him the chance to choose." Through the long winter months, as Eleanor's condition became unmistakable, Caleb cared for her with a gentleness that belied his rough appearance. He'd loved her from the first, he finally admitted, but he knew her heart belonged to another. "I'll see you safe," he promised. "You and the child both, and when you're ready, I'll help you get home." "This isn't my child," Eleanor said bitterly, hand on her swelling belly. "It's his, that monster's." "No," Caleb said firmly. "This child is yours, only yours, and it deserves a chance, same as anyone." Back at the ranch, Abel marked the passing seasons in silence and work. A year now since Eleanor had vanished. He'd stopped drinking, finding it only made the dreams worse. The townspeople had stopped mentioning her name in his presence. Even the hands knew not to speak of the empty place at the table, the unused room, the woman's saddle gathering dust in the barn. But late at night, when the wind was right, Abel still found himself listening for footsteps on the porch, for the door to open, for Eleanor to walk back into his life with some explanation that would make it all make sense. He'd forgive her anything. He knew now, pride, anger, hurt, None of it mattered compared to the hollow ache of her absence. If she'd only come home, he'd find a way to bridge whatever distance lay between them. He just needed her to come home. The rain began at sunset, a cold December drizzle that turned the desert roads to mud. Abel sat by the dying fire, ledger open on his lap. Though he'd long since stopped seeing the numbers, another year ending, another year alone, he'd grown thinner, harder, like the land itself had carved away everything unnecessary, leaving only sinew and stubborn endurance. The knock came so softly he almost missed it beneath the rain's percussion on the tin roof. He sat frozen, wondering if he'd imagined it. Wouldn't be the first time hope had played tricks on him. Then it came again, more insistent. Abel crossed to the door in 3 strides, yanked it open, and felt the world tilt off its axis. Eleanor stood on his porch, rain streaming down a face gaunt with hardship. Her once fine traveling cloak hung in tatters. Her dark hair, always so carefully pinned, fell loose and wild around her shoulders. But it was the bundle in her arms that stopped his breath. A baby, wrapped in what looked like an old army blanket, sheltered against her chest. Eleanor, her name came out cracked, barely a whisper. Hello, Abel. Her voice was smaller than he remembered, rougher. May we come in, just for tonight? He stepped aside wordlessly, his mind struggling to reconcile the ghost on his doorstep with the woman who'd haunted his dreams. She moved past him, bringing the sense of pine smoke and storm and something indefinably wild. The baby made a small sound, and she adjusted the blanket with practiced ease. Sit, Abel managed, gesturing to the chair by the fire. You're soaked through. Eleanor sank into the chair as if her legs could no longer hold her. In the firelight, Abel could see the full extent of her transformation, the fine-boned face now sharp with deprivation, hands that had once been soft now rough and scarred, a wariness in her eyes that spoke of hard-won survival. Is the child? He stopped, not sure what he was asking. She's hungry, Eleanor said simply. If I could trouble you for some warm milk? Abel heated milk, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. Behind him, he heard Eleanor murmuring to the baby, soft nonsense sounds that made his chest tight. When he turned with the cup, she'd opened her cloak. The baby was tiny, perhaps 2 months old, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed too knowing for an infant. Eleanor fed her carefully, drop by drop from a clean cloth dipped in milk. The domestic intimacy of the scene, Eleanor in his chair, feeding a child by his fire, was both everything he'd dreamed and nothing like what he'd imagined. Her name is Hope, Eleanor said without looking up. Born in October, in the mountains. Abel pulled up a stool, maintaining careful distance. Eleanor, where? Please. She finally met his eyes, and the pain there stopped his words. I'll answer your questions. All of them. But not tonight. Tonight I just need... Her voice broke. We just need somewhere safe to sleep. He wanted to demand explanations, to rage at her for leaving, to fall at her feet and beg her never to disappear again. Instead, he said, your room is as you left it. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or sorrow. Thank you. She rose unsteadily. The baby cradled close. At the bedroom door, she paused. I didn't think you'd let me in. This is your home, Abel said roughly. That never changed. She disappeared into the room, closing the door with the same quiet finality as she had on their wedding night. Abel sat by the fire until it burned to ash, listening to the rain and the occasional cry of the child that wasn't his, couldn't be his, but was here in his house with the woman who was still, legally at least, his wife. Dawn came gray and reluctant. Abel had coffee brewing when Eleanor emerged, the baby sleeping in her arms. In daylight, her exhaustion was even more apparent, purple shadows beneath her eyes, a tremor in her hands as she accepted the cup he offered. I should explain, she began. Eat first. He set a plate before her, biscuits, bacon, the simple food she'd once prepared for him. She ate mechanically, her free arm cradling Hope. They sat in silence until the baby woke, crying. Eleanor rose to walk her, swaying with the automatic rhythm of maternal instinct, Abel watched, mesmerized by this stranger wearing Eleanor's face. This woman who'd learned to mother someone else's child in the mountains while he'd sat here nursing whiskey and self-pity. "I was attacked," Eleanor said suddenly, her back to him as she faced the window. "On the road to Denver, a man who promised safe passage. When I fought him off, I fled into the mountains. Got lost. Nearly died." Abel's hands clenched into fists. "Who was he? Dead, most likely. Or gone back east. It doesn't matter now." She turned, and her smile was bitter. "You see why I couldn't come back sooner. How could I return carrying carrying this shame? You were forced. That's not shame. That's—" "A man named Sullivan found me. Caleb Sullivan. He saved my life, nursed me through fever, and through this. He lives alone in the high country. Was kind to me. Gentle. Never asked for anything." She paused. "He told me I should come home. Said you deserved the chance to choose." "Choose what?" "Whether you could accept us. Both of us." She held his gaze steadily now. "I won't blame you if you can't. I know what the town will say. I know what this means for your reputation, your business, a wife who disappeared and returned with another man's child." "My wife returned," Abel interrupted. "That's all that matters." Eleanor's composure cracked. "You don't understand. This child, she's evidence of my shame. Every time you look at her, you'll remember—" "I'll remember that you survived." He stood, crossed to her in 2 strides. "I'll remember that you were strong enough to come home." The baby fussed, and Eleanor shifted her, exposing a tiny hand that waved aimlessly in the air. Without thinking, Abel offered his finger. Hope grasped it with surprising strength, and something inside him broke open. All the loneliness, the bitter nights, the endless wondering, washed away by this tiny grip. "She's innocent," he said softly. "Whatever else happened, she's innocent." Eleanor began to cry then, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "The town, they'll crucify us. You know they will." "Let them try." Word spread before the sun reached its zenith. Mrs. Hutchins claimed she'd seen Eleanor through the window while delivering eggs. By afternoon, half of Perdition had found reasons to ride past the McCrae ranch. By evening, the first delegation arrived. Reverend Morse and 2 church elders, faces grave with Christian concern. "We've come to offer guidance in this difficult time," Morse intoned, eyeing Eleanor and the baby with barely disguised judgment. "Perhaps the child could be placed with a family better suited." "Get off my land." Abel's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Now, Brother McCrae, surely you see the scandal." Abel stepped onto the porch, hand resting on his pistol. "I see my wife and daughter. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Now get—" They left, but Abel knew it was only the beginning. That night, he made a pallet by the fire again, giving Eleanor space, but near midnight, the baby's cries woke him. He found Eleanor walking the floor, exhaustion making her stumble. "Here," he said, holding out his arms. "Let me—" She hesitated, then carefully transferred Hope to him. The baby was impossibly light, fragile as a bird. Abel walked her as he'd seen Eleanor do, humming tunelessly. Gradually, the cries subsided. "You're good with her," Eleanor said from the doorway. "Had a little brother once, sometimes helped my mother when he was fussy." They stood in comfortable silence, the baby breathing softly between them. Finally, Eleanor said, "I need to tell you about Philadelphia. Why I agreed to marry a stranger. You don't owe me. I do." She sat heavily in the chair. "My father was a banker, respectable, church-going, also a drunk who beat my mother until she died when I was 15. After that, he turned his fists on me. When I was 23, I fought back, pushed him down the stairs. He lived, but barely. The scandal was hushed up. I was sent to an aunt, then another, each farther from Philadelphia. Finally, your mother's cousin offered a solution, a new life out west, far from wagging tongues." Abel continued walking Hope, processing this revelation. "So, you ran from one prison to another. I thought it would be different. You seemed kind in your letters, and you are, but I was so damaged, so afraid. Every time you looked at me with desire, I saw my father's fists. Every kindness felt like a debt I'd have to pay with my body. So I ran again, because that's what I knew how to do. And now I'm tired of running." She met his eyes in the dim light. "Caleb helped me see that. He could have taken advantage, a woman alone, desperate, pregnant. Instead, he was honorable. It made me realize that some men like him, like you, are capable of goodness without price." Abel settled hope in the wooden cradle he'd built years ago, in hope of his own children. "Stay," he said simply. "Both of you. We'll face whatever comes together." Eleanor rose, crossed to him, and for the first time since their wedding, initiated contact. Her hand on his arm was light as a butterfly, but it felt like an anchor. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, the rain had stopped. The desert night stretched clear and cold, full of stars and silence and the promise of difficult tomorrows. But inside the small ranch house, a fragile new family began to form, not the one Abel had imagined when he'd sent for a mail-order bride, but perhaps the one they all needed. The real test would come with daylight, with the town's judgment and the weight of convention. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, they had this: a warm room, a sleeping child, and the first tentative steps toward trust. The blow came swift and merciless. 3 days after Eleanor's return, Abel arrived at First National Bank of Perdition to find Harrison Walsh, the bank president, waiting with a ledger and a cold smile. "McCrae," Walsh said, not offering his hand. "I'm afraid we need to discuss your loan." "Not due for another 6 months?" Abel replied evenly, though his gut tightened. "True. However, there's a morality clause in the contract. Given recent developments at your household, the bank feels it would be imprudent to maintain our current arrangement." Walsh's eyes glittered with sanctimonious pleasure. "We're calling in the loan. You have 30 days. Abel kept his face stone still, though inside he calculated rapidly. The loan was for improvements: new fencing, a windmill, breeding stock. Without it, he couldn't expand the herd, couldn't meet his contracts. "This is about my wife. This is about maintaining proper standards in our community," Walsh countered. "A man who harbors a fallen woman and her bastard." Abel's hand shot out, gripping Walsh's collar, hauling him half across the desk. "Choose your next words very carefully. Assault won't help your situation." Walsh gasped. 30 days. McCrae. Pay in full or forfeit the collateral." Abel released him, turned on his heel, and walked out without another word. On the street, he noticed how conversations stopped as he passed, how women gathered their skirts aside. By the time he reached Morrison's general store, his jaw ached from clenching. "Abel." Tom Morrison greeted him, uncomfortable. "What can I do for you?" "Need supplies." Abel handed over his list. "Put it on my account." Morrison shifted his weight. "About that. The missus feels, that is, we think it might be best if you settled up. Cash only, going forward." 20 years I've traded here," Abel said quietly. "Never missed a payment." "I know, but—" Morrison glanced toward the back room where his wife lurked. "You understand our position. We got daughters. Can't be seen supporting. Irregularity." Abel paid cash for what he could afford. Less than half his list. Loading the meager supplies, he caught sight of Eleanor through the window. She stood at the counter, hope in her arms, while Mrs. Morrison spoke in sharp, carrying tones. "Shameless is what it is, parading that child around decent folk. In my day, such women knew to keep to the shadows." Eleanor's spine stayed straight, though Abel saw her hands tremble as she counted out coins. "I need thread and cloth for the baby. Mrs. Morrison, will you sell them to me or not? Your money's good, I suppose." The woman sniffed. "Though I can't imagine it'll last long, what with your husband losing his backing." Eleanor's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you haven't heard? Bank called in his loan. Seems they don't cotton to financing degenerates." Abel pushed through the door. Eleanor, time to go. She looked at him, stricken. Abel, not here. He took her elbow gently, guided her out past the staring customers. On the street, she pulled free. This is my fault. The bank, the store. This is their choice, he corrected. Their small-mindedness, their fear, not yours. But if I hadn't come back, then I'd still be half dead inside. The words came out harsher than intended. Get in the wagon. They rode in silence until they were clear of town. Hope fussed in her basket, and Eleanor soothed her absently, but Abel could see her mind working, guilt etching lines around her eyes. I'll leave, she said suddenly. Take Hope and go. Once we're gone, they'll what? Pat me on the head and say good job throwing out your used wife. Abel pulled the horses to a stop, turned to face her. I waited for you. Through every endless night, every empty day. You think I'll let their poison drive you away now? But your ranch is dirt and cattle. You're my wife. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. I'm not worth losing everything you've built. You're worth more than anything I could build. He reached across, cupped her face in one calloused hand. But I need you to stop running. Stay and fight with me. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. I don't know how to fight. Then I'll teach you. The campaign against them escalated quickly. Sunday service became a trial by whispers when they entered the church. Reverend Morse's sermon on the wages of sin felt particularly pointed, especially when he made repeated eye contact with their pew. Several families moved away from them, leaving a ring of empty seats like a quarantine. Eleanor bore it with rigid dignity, holding Hope close. But Abel saw the toll, how her hands shook during hymns, how she bit her lip when the offering plate passed them by without stopping. After service, a cluster of women cornered Eleanor on the church steps while Abel was fetching the wagon. That child needs proper Christian parents, Martha Hutchins declared, not a woman of loose morals teaching her shameful ways. Judge not, Eleanor replied quietly, lest you be judged. Don't you dare quote scripture at us. Sarah Walsh spat. You who broke your marriage vows, who rutted with strange men. Enough. Eleanor's voice turned steel sharp. You know nothing of what I survived, but I'll tell you this. I've seen true evil, and it wasn't in the mountains. It's here, in your cruel tongues and cold hearts. The women recoiled as if slapped. Abel arrived to find Eleanor standing alone, the congregation giving her wide berth. She climbed into the wagon with deliberate grace, settling Hope in her lap. Well, she asked as they drove away. Did I fight correctly? Like a lion, he said, and was rewarded with her first real smile since returning. But fighting had a price. 2 of Abel's regular buyers canceled their contracts, citing vague concerns about his reliability. The Hernandez family, who'd worked his ranch for 3 years, gave notice. They couldn't risk association with scandal, not with their precarious position as Mexican workers in an Anglo town. One evening, Abel returned from checking fences to find Eleanor scrubbing viciously at the front door. Someone had painted "whore" in red letters across the wood. Leave it, he said, gently taking the brush from her raw hands. We'll replace the door. With what money? She laughed bitterly. We can barely afford food since the store raised their prices. Just for us, of course. That night, lying in his narrow bed, Abel heard Eleanor crying through the thin wall. Not the quiet tears she sometimes shed, but deep, wrenching sobs that made him ache to go to her. But they'd maintained careful distance since her return. She in her room, he in his, neither quite ready to bridge that final gap. He rose, knocked softly on her door. Eleanor? Go away. Her voice was muffled, thick with tears. Please. He pressed his palm against the wood. You're not alone in this. I should be. It's my burden. Our burden. He tried the handle, found it unlocked, and entered slowly. Eleanor sat on the bed, Hope sleeping peacefully in the cradle nearby. In the moonlight, tears tracked silver down her cheeks. They're right, she whispered. I am ruined, broken. You deserve... You... He crossed to the bed, sat carefully beside her. I deserve you, exactly as you are. Even knowing what was done to me? Even seeing proof of it every day in Hope's face? Hope's face, Abel said slowly, shows me courage, shows me what you survived to come home. He hesitated, then took her hand. When I look at her, I see your strength, nothing else. Eleanor studied their joined hands as if they were foreign objects. In the mountains, when the fever was worst, I dreamed of you, of this house. Caleb said I called your name for 3 days straight, and I spent those same days searching for you. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Maybe somehow we were calling to each other across all those miles. She looked up at him then, eyes luminous in the darkness. I want to be your wife, Abel, truly your wife, but I'm terrified. What if I can't? What if I'm too damaged to ever? Then we'll find our own way. He lifted her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart hammered. Whatever that looks like, however long it takes. Eleanor freed her hand, and for a moment he thought he'd presumed too much. Then she placed both palms on his face, studying him with an intensity that made him still, slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse. She leaned in. The kiss was tentative, barely a brush of lips. Abel remained motionless, letting her set the pace. She pulled back, searched his eyes, then kissed him again, deeper this time, with a desperate edge that spoke of loneliness and longing and fear all mixed together. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "Stay," she whispered, "just to sleep. I'm so tired of being alone." Abel stretched out beside her, fully clothed atop the covers. Eleanor curled against him, her head on his shoulder, and he marveled at the simple miracle of her warmth, her trust, her presence after so many empty months. "Tell me about your brother," she said softly, "the one you helped with as a baby." So he did, speaking quietly into the darkness about Sam, his gap-toothed grin, his fearlessness, the way he'd followed Abel everywhere like a shadow, about the raid that took him and their mother, about surviving when they didn't, about building this ranch as a monument to their memory. "That's why you understood," Eleanor murmured, already drifting towards sleep. "About carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry." He pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent of her, soap and sage and something uniquely Eleanor. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Broken together," she agreed sleepily. "Maybe that's enough." As dawn approached, hope stirred, and Eleanor rose to feed her. Abel watched from the bed as his wife tended their daughter, not by blood, but by choice, which somehow felt more significant. The early light caught Eleanor's profile, softening the hard edges that suffering had carved. "The town won't give up," she said without turning. "They'll keep pushing until we break or leave. Then we'll push back harder." Abel sat up, decision crystallizing. "I've been defensive, trying to weather this. Time to go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" "You'll see." He stood, pressed a kiss to Hope's downy head, then to Eleanor's lips. "Get dressed in your best. We're going to town. Abel, trust me." An hour later, they rode down Main Street like royalty. Eleanor in her one remaining good dress, Abel in his Sunday suit, Hope, dressed in a tiny gown Eleanor had sewn from her old petticoat, gurgled happily in her mother's arms. At the bank, Abel didn't wait to be announced. He strode into Walsh's office with Eleanor beside him. 30 days, you said. I'll need that in writing, and an exact accounting of what's owed." Walsh sputtered. "You can't just barge in. I'm a customer of this bank." Abel said calmly, "My wife and I have business to discuss." "Unless you'd prefer we take that business to the newspaper? I'm sure they'd be interested in how First National treats longtime customers," Eleanor added sweetly. "Especially customers who've never missed a payment until the bank decided to enforce morality clauses selectively. I wonder how many other accounts might bear such scrutiny." Walsh paled. Everyone knew his brother frequented the town's less reputable establishments. "I'll have the papers drawn up. Today," Abel said. "We'll wait." They left with documentation in hand and a subtle victory. Word would spread that the McCraes weren't cowering. At the general store, Eleanor sailed past Mrs. Morrison's glare to examine goods with deliberate leisure. "The blue fabric," she said clearly. 10 yards. And that lace. Hope needs new clothes as she grows. We don't extend credit. Cash. Eleanor produced bills from her purse, money Abel hadn't known she still had. "Unless my cash isn't good enough either." I'm sure the newspaper would find that interesting too. They made their purchases under hostile eyes, but with heads high. On the street, Joaquin Hernandez approached nervously. "Senor McCrae, we didn't want to leave, but my wife, she fears for the children." "I understand," Abel said. "But if you change your mind, there's always work at my ranch. For those brave enough to take it." By the time they headed home, a subtle shift had occurred. They'd shown the town that shame hadn't broken them, that they wouldn't slink away at the first sign of pressure. It was a small victory in what promised to be a long war, but it was a start. That night, as Hope slept and the house settled into quiet, Eleanor came to Abel in the main room. She'd let her hair down, and it fell in dark waves around her shoulders. Without a word, she held out her hand. He took it, let her lead him to the bedroom, their bedroom now. In the lamplight, she was trembling but determined. "I want to try," she whispered, "to be your wife in truth, but—" "We go slow," he promised. "Only what you're ready for. Nothing more." What followed was tentative, careful, a navigation of boundaries and trust. When Eleanor froze at certain touches, Abel stopped immediately. When memories threatened to overwhelm her, he held her until they passed. It wasn't the passionate consummation he'd once imagined, but something deeper, a communion of two scarred souls finding healing in each other. Afterward, Eleanor wept, not from pain, but from release. "I didn't think I could," she whispered against his chest. "Didn't think I'd ever want to again." "You're the strongest woman I know," Abel said, stroking her hair. "Never doubt that." They lay entwined as the moon set, no longer alone in their separate griefs, but joined in shared resilience. Outside, the desert wind howled its ancient song. But inside the small ranch house, something new had taken root, fragile still, but growing stronger with each passing hour. The town's hostility remained, would remain for some time yet, but they would face it together now, truly together, and that made all the difference. In the darkness, hope stirred, and Eleanor rose to tend her. Abel watched his wife and daughter in the lamplight and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, not just hope, but certainty. They would survive this. They would more than survive. They would thrive. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning, dust devils dancing in his wake. Eleanor saw him first from the kitchen window, a lone rider approaching with the deliberate pace of authority. Something in his bearing, the way he sat his horse, sent a chill through her bones. "Abel," she called softly, not taking her eyes off the rider. "Someone's coming." Abel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He squinted at the approaching figure, then stiffened. "Take Hope inside. Lock the door. Abel. Now, Eleanor." She gathered Hope from her blanket on the porch, slipping inside but staying near the window. The rider stopped 20 feet from Abel, and Eleanor could see him clearly now. A lean man in a black suit despite the heat, with a badge glinting on his vest. "You, Marshal James Crawford," the man announced, not dismounting. "Looking for a man named Caleb Sullivan. Got word he might be in these parts." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the glass, she saw Abel's stance casual but ready, hand nowhere near his gun, but clearly aware of its position. "Don't know any Sullivan," Abel said evenly. "What's he wanted for?" "Bank robbery in Colorado, 3 years back, killed a guard." Crawford's eyes swept the property, lingering on the house. "Funny thing, witness said he headed south, maybe toward New Mexico. Been tracking rumors ever since. Latest has him helping a woman in distress somewhere in these mountains last winter." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. Caleb, who'd saved her life, who'd shown her nothing but kindness, a killer, a bank robber. Like I said, Abel continued, voice steady as iron. Don't know him, but if you're thirsty, Wells around back. Crawford smiled, thin as a blade. Appreciate the hospitality. Mind if I ask your missus? Women sometimes remember things different. My wife's tending our baby. Rather not disturb them. Baby? Crawford's interest sharpened. Heard tell you were newly married just last year. Quick work. Abel said nothing, just waited with the patience of stone. Finally. Crawford touched his hat. I'll be in perdition a few days, if you remember anything. He wheeled his horse and rode off, but Eleanor knew he'd be back. She emerged once he was out of sight. Hope clutched tight. Abel, I have to tell you, not here. He guided her inside. Check the windows. Tonight, when we're sure no one's listening. The day passed in taut silence. Abel went about his chores, but Eleanor caught him checking the horizon repeatedly. She tried to focus on housework, on Hope's needs, but her mind raced. Caleb had mentioned trouble in his past, but she'd never pressed. Now his kindness seemed shadowed by violence she couldn't reconcile. That evening, after a supper neither could eat, they sat close by the dying fire. Hope slept in her cradle, peaceful in her innocence. Eleanor told Abel everything, Caleb's cabin location, his gentle care, the way he'd spoken of his past in fragments. He said the war broke something in him, that he'd done things. But Abel, he saved my life. He never asked for anything, never tried to. She trailed off, unable to voice what Caleb could have done but didn't. You believe he robbed that bank? Killed a guard? Eleanor considered. The man I knew was capable of violence. I could see it in him, controlled but present. But he was also honorable. If he did those things, there was a reason. Reasons don't matter to the law. Abel stared into the embers. Crawford's no fool. He'll piece together your disappearance, your return with Hope. He'll come back. I won't let Caleb hang for saving me, Eleanor said fiercely. Whatever else he did, you won't have to. Abel's voice was quiet but firm. We tell Crawford nothing, but Eleanor, if Sullivan contacts you, if he comes here, he won't. He said he was heading further west, maybe California. He wanted to disappear completely. She touched Abel's arm. He told me to be happy. Said you were a good man who deserved the truth. I don't think we'll ever see him again. But Marshal Crawford was thorough. Over the next days, he questioned everyone in perdition about strangers, mountain men, anyone who might fit Sullivan's description. The town, usually so eager to gossip about the McCraes, proved surprisingly tight-lipped about outsiders when faced with federal authority. Crawford appeared at their ranch again on Thursday. This time, Eleanor met him at the door, Hope on her hip. Mrs. McCrae. He touched his hat. Hoping you might help me. Your husband says you were away for a time last year. Visiting family, was it? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I needed some time alone. The adjustment to frontier life was difficult. Alone? His eyes flicked to Hope. That's a pretty baby. How old? 3 months. Truth. As far as it went. And you were gone. Several months. She shifted Hope higher. Is there something specific you need? Marshal, my daughter's hungry. Crawford studied her, and Eleanor fought not to fidget under that penetrating stare. Just wondering if you might have encountered Sullivan during your travels. He's said to be sympathetic to women in difficult circumstances. I wouldn't know. Eleanor kept her voice level. I stayed with a widow woman near Santa Fe, quiet, respectable. Now if you'll excuse me. She closed the door before he could respond, then leaned against it, heart racing. Through the window. She watched Crawford mount his horse, but instead of leaving, he rode slowly around their property, examining everything with a lawman's eye. He knows, she whispered when Abel came in for lunch. He knows I'm lying. Maybe, but knowing and proving are different things. Abel pulled her close. You did well. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching clouds scud across the moon, when movement caught her eye. A figure at the edge of their property, barely visible in the darkness. Her breath caught. The shape. The way he stood. "Abel," she whispered urgently. "Someone's out there." Abel was beside her instantly, rifle in hand. They waited, watching, until the figure stepped into a patch of moonlight. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. It was Caleb. He looked thinner, worn, but unmistakable. He raised one hand, greeting, warning, farewell, then melted back into the darkness. Eleanor started for the door, but Abel caught her arm. "No, if Crawford has men watching, but he came back. He needs help. He needs us to stay away. That's why he didn't approach." Abel's grip gentled. "He's checking on you, making sure you're safe. Let him go. Eleanor." She pressed against the window, searching the darkness, but Caleb was gone. "I never thanked him properly, never told him. He knows." Abel turned her from the window. "Whatever else he is, he knows what he did mattered." The next morning, Eleanor found something tucked under a stone by the well, a small wooden carving of a bird in flight, wings spread toward freedom. She recognized Caleb's work immediately, remembered him whittling by the fire during her recovery. No note, no words, just this small token. She showed Abel, who examined it thoughtfully. "He's saying goodbye. Should we tell Crawford? Tell him what? That we found a carving?" Abel handed it back. "Keep it, but say nothing." Eleanor tucked the bird into her apron pocket, where its smooth curves pressed against her palm like a blessing. That afternoon, Crawford came by once more. "Sullivan was seen in this area last night," he announced without preamble. "You folks notice anything unusual?" "Coyotes were active," Abel said calmly. "Had the horses stirred up, nothing else." Crawford's gaze bore into them. "Funny how Sullivan keeps circling back to this region, almost like he's got unfinished business. Can't imagine what that would be," Eleanor said, meeting his stare. "We're simple ranch folk. Marshall, no connection to outlaws." "No?" Crawford's smile was sharp. "Well, maybe you'll remember different if I tell you there's a reward. $500 for information leading to his capture. That'd go far toward paying off a called-in loan, wouldn't it?" Eleanor felt Abel tense beside her, but his voice stayed steady. "We don't need blood money. Marshall, we'll manage our affairs honestly." Crawford studied them another long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll be moving on tomorrow. But Mrs. McCrae?" He looked directly at her. "That baby's blessed to have a mother who'd protect her so fierce, whatever she had to do to survive." After he left, Eleanor sank into a chair, shaking. "He knows. God help us. He knows everything. But he's leaving," Abel pointed out. "Without Caleb. Without pressing us further. Maybe Crawford's got his own sense of justice." That night, as if in answer to Eleanor's prayers, news came from town. A man matching Sullivan's description had been spotted boarding a train in El Paso, heading west, whether true or not. Crawford left Perdition the next morning, and the town breathed easier without his searching presence. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching his dust disappear, the wooden bird warm in her pocket. She thought of Caleb somewhere in the vast west, free but forever running, of herself. No longer running but forever marked by her journey, of the strange turns that had brought violence and kindness, loss and redemption, all tangled together like desert vines. "What are you thinking?" Abel asked, joining her. "That I need to write a letter," she said quietly. "To California, to a general delivery in some small town where a traveling man might check for mail. Eleanor, not to reveal anything, just to say thank you, to tell him hope thrives, to wish him peace." She looked up at her husband. "He saved more than my life. Abel, he saved my ability to trust again, to love again. I owe him that acknowledgement." Abel considered, then nodded. "Write it. I'll post it when I'm 3 towns over, selling cattle. No connection to us." That evening, Eleanor sat at the table, pen in hand, searching for words. How did you thank someone for returning you to yourself? For showing kindness when cruelty would have been easier? For letting you go when holding on might have filled their own emptiness? In the end, she wrote simply, "See, The bird flies free, as you hoped. She grows strong and fearless. The view from the window is everything you said it would be. May you find your own window, your own view, your own peace. With gratitude beyond words, E. She sealed it carefully, addressed it to William Blake, General Delivery, Monterey, California. The poet Caleb had quoted during her fevered days, the only clue she could offer that he might recognize. As she handed the letter to Abel the next week, Eleanor felt something release in her chest. Not forgiveness, for there was nothing to forgive, but completion. A chapter closed with grace. No more looking back, she told Abel. Only forward now. He kissed her forehead. Forward, together. But the past had one more card to play. A month after Crawford's departure, a package arrived at the ranch, no return address, postmarked from Denver. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was $500 in bills and a marshal's badge with a note. For the child's future, sometimes the law serves justice. Sometimes justice serves itself. Give her a better chance than her mother had. J.C. Eleanor stared at the money. Understanding flooding through her. Crawford had known, had perhaps always known, and had chosen mercy over law, humanity over duty. Blood money? Abel asked quietly. Redemption money, Eleanor corrected. For hope, for her education, her chances, her life beyond these circumstances. They put the money away carefully, a secret fund for their daughter's future. That night, Eleanor nursed hope by lamplight, humming an old lullaby her own mother had sung before violence stole away innocence. But this child would know different. This child would know love without price, protection without condition, a future unlimited by the past's shadows. Outside, a desert owl called across the darkness. Hunter and Harold both, carrying messages between worlds. Eleanor listened to its cry and felt, finally, truly, the weight of running lift from her shoulders. She was home. They all were home. And that was enough miracle for any lifetime. The wooden bird sat on the mantel, wings spread toward tomorrow, while the McCrae family settled into sleep, scarred but whole, tested but unbroken, bound by choice rather than blood, which in the end was the strongest bond of all. The first snow came early that year, October catching the desert unprepared. Abel had seen it building for days, the way the cattle bunched together, the heaviness in the air, birds flying south in ragged formations. By the time he got the herd to lower pasture, the storm was upon them. We need to go, he told Eleanor that morning, watching dark clouds mass over the mountains. All of us, up to the old winter camp. Eleanor looked up from kneading bread, flour dusting her hands. The bank, we can't abandon the ranch. They'll use it as excuse to foreclose. Better to lose the ranch than lose ourselves. He crossed to where Hope played with wooden blocks on the floor, a gift from Doc Hartwell, one of the few townspeople who still treated them kindly. Storm coming in feels like a bad one. The winter camp's solid, protected. We can weather it there. She studied his face, reading the concern he tried to hide. In their months together as true husband and wife, she'd learned his silences, his subtle signals. How long? Week, maybe 2, until it blows over and we can dig out. He knelt beside Hope, who reached for him with chubby arms. Pack warm, everything we can't stand to lose. They worked quickly, loading the wagon with supplies, food, blankets, medicine, ammunition. Eleanor wrapped their few precious items, her mother's Bible, the wooden bird from Caleb, the money from Marshall Crawford hidden in a flour tin. Hope, now crawling everywhere with determined curiosity, seemed to sense the urgency, staying close to her parents instead of exploring. The journey into the mountains took most of the day. The old winter camp sat in a sheltered valley, built by Abel's father years ago for exactly this purpose, a refuge when nature turned hostile. The cabin was smaller than their ranch house, but solid. Logs chinked tight, a stone fireplace that drew well. Abel's father had chosen the spot wisely, protected from wind, near a spring that rarely froze completely, with a small barn for the horses. By nightfall, Snow was falling thick and fast. They worked by lamplight to settle in, Abel tending the horses and chopping wood, Eleanor making the cabin habitable, Hope sleeping in her basket by the fire. When darkness fell complete, the world shrank to just this: one room, 3 souls, and winter howling outside. "Your father was smart, building this place," Eleanor said, ladling stew into bowls. "He was from Montana originally. Knew about real winters." Abel accepted his bowl gratefully. "Said a man should always have somewhere to retreat to, somewhere the world can't follow." They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling, snow hissing against the windows. After supper, Abel brought in more wood while Eleanor prepared Hope for bed. The baby protested the unfamiliar surroundings until Eleanor sang softly, the same lullaby that had soothed her own fears in Caleb's cabin. "She's adjusting well," Abel observed, banking the fire for the night. "Children are resilient." Eleanor settled Hope in the drawer they'd fashioned into a crib. "It's adults who struggle with change." Speaking from experience, she moved to the window, watching snow erase the world. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Being truly married, having a child, facing the world together instead of running from it." Abel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned into his warmth, marveling still at how natural it felt now. Those first weeks after Crawford's visit had been tentative, learning each other's bodies, boundaries, needs, but somewhere between summer and autumn, awkwardness had given way to intimacy deeper than she'd thought possible. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "No." She turned in his arms, facing him. "Sorrows, yes, things I wish had been different, but no regrets. This, us, hope. It's worth everything we endured to get here." He kissed her then, slow and thorough, and she responded with equal warmth. They made love by firelight while snow built walls around their sanctuary, the outside world fading until only this moment existed, skin and breath and connection that transcended their damaged pasts. Later, wrapped in quilts and each other, they talked in whispers to avoid waking Hope. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Abel said. "Not the painful parts, the good memories." So Eleanor spoke of spring in Rittenhouse Square, ice cream socials, the library where she'd lost herself in books, the Christmas before her mother died when snow had made the city magical. Every gaslight a star, every window a promise of warmth within. "I thought I'd miss it," she admitted. "The civilization, the culture, but cities are just cages with prettier bars. Here." She gestured at the cabin, the storm, the wilderness beyond. "Here I can breathe. Even when breathing means isolation, hard work, the town's judgment, especially then." She traced patterns on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong beneath her palm. "In Philadelphia, I was Eleanor Hargrave, banker's daughter, marked by scandal. In perdition, I'm the fallen woman with the bastard child. But here, now, with you, I'm just Eleanor, wife, mother, myself. That's freedom worth any price." They slept entwined, Hope's soft breathing mixing with the wind song, safe in their temporary exile. The storm lasted 8 days. 8 days of white silence broken only by necessary ventures outside. Abel checking on horses, hauling water, splitting wood. Eleanor kept them fed and warm. Teaching Hope new words, snow became no, with delighted shrieks. Mending clothes, reading aloud from the one book she'd packed, Emerson's Essays, pages worn soft from handling. On the 4th day, cabin fever struck. Hope grew fussy, Eleanor restless, even Abel's steady temperament frayed. Then Eleanor remembered something from her own childhood, shadow puppets on the wall. Using hands and lamplight, she created rabbits and birds, making up stories that had Hope giggling and Abel adding sound effects. Soon he was trying his own shapes, mostly unsuccessful attempts at cattle and horses that looked more like misshapen dogs. But his failures had them all laughing until their sides hurt. "I haven't heard you laugh like that," Eleanor said later, after Hope had finally succumbed to sleep. Haven't had much cause to—" Abel pulled her against his side. "Before you came back, laughter felt like betrayal, like being happy meant forgetting everyone I'd lost. And now I think maybe they'd want this for me. My mother especially. She always said the best revenge against sorrow was joy." He pressed a kiss to Eleanor's hair. "She would have loved you. Loved how you fight for happiness instead of just accepting misery." On the 6th day, they woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. Abel ventured out first, wading through waist-deep drifts to check the horses, gather firewood, hunt for fresh meat. Eleanor watched from the window as he moved through the white landscape, a dark figure against brilliance, steady and sure. That afternoon, while Hope napped, they made love with urgent passion, as if the storm had awakened something primal. Afterward, lying spent and satiated, Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What is it?" Abel asked, concerned. "I'm happy," she whispered. "Truly, completely happy. I didn't think I deserved it after everything." "You deserve all of it," he said fiercely. "Every moment of joy, every good thing, never doubt that." That evening, as they prepared a feast from the rabbit Abel had snared, Eleanor said, "We could stay, not just through the storm, permanently. Build a life up here away from town, from judgment, from all of it." Abel considered. "Tempting, but that's just another kind of running." And we agreed, no more running. Even if staying means fighting forever, even if Hope grows up marked by my sins, Hope grows up with parents who love her, who chose her, who'll teach her to hold her head high. He took Eleanor's hand across the rough table. "Besides, the town won't stay set against us forever. People get tired of hate. Some are already softening. Doc Hartwell, the widow Martinez, even Tom Morrison looked ashamed last time I saw him. You have more faith in human nature than I do. Maybe, or maybe I just have faith in us." On the 8th day, sun emerged brilliant and harsh, setting the snow to glittering like scattered diamonds. Abel spent the morning digging out, creating paths to the barn, checking their buried supplies. By afternoon, he'd determined they could make it back to the ranch if they were careful. They packed slowly, reluctant to leave their haven. The cabin had become more than shelter. It was proof they could survive together, thrive even, without the world's approval or assistance. "We'll come back," Abel promised, seeing Eleanor's wistful last look. "Every winter if you want. Our own tradition." The journey down took twice as long as the climb up, wagon wheels fighting for purchase on icy trails. Hope, bundled in furs like a small bear, watched everything with wide-eyed wonder, pointing at ice formations and snow-laden trees with babbled commentary. The ranch appeared intact but buried. It would take days to dig out completely, tend the stock, repair what winter had damaged. But as they pulled into the yard, smoke rising from a neighbor's chimney caught Abel's attention. "Someone's here," he said, hand moving to his rifle. But the figure emerging from their house wasn't a threat. It was Joaquin Hernandez, the former hand who'd left rather than risk association with scandal. "Senor Abel," he called, hurrying to help with the horses. "I came to check, to feed the chickens, keep the pipes from freezing. I hope this is acceptable." "Joaquin," Abel clasped the man's shoulder. "More than acceptable. But your family, the risk." "My Maria. She told me I was a fool. Said real men don't abandon friends because of whispers." Joaquin's weathered face creased in a smile. "She was right. She usually is." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, Hope in her arms. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your kindness means more than you know." Joaquin ducked his head, embarrassed by the gratitude. "The widow Martinez. She also came, left food, firewood. Doc Hartwell stopped by too. Wanted to check the little one when you returned." "See?" Abel murmured to Eleanor. "Faith in human nature." They invited Joaquin to stay for supper, but he declined. Maria was expecting him. After he left, they stood in their doorway, surveying their snow-covered kingdom. The house felt different after their time in the cabin. Larger, lonelier, but also more theirs. Earned by endurance. Home, Eleanor said, testing the word. Home. Abel agreed. That night, they slept in their own bed while Hope gurgled happily in her crib, glad to be back in familiar surroundings. Outside, wind whispered across snow, carrying the scent of wood smoke and winter stars. The world beyond their fences might still harbor judgment and cruelty. But here, in this moment, they had carved out something precious, a family not of blood but of choice, a love not despite suffering but because of what suffering had taught them about grace. Eleanor lay awake long after Abel's breathing deepened into sleep, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her, listening to Hope's soft sighs. In the cabin, happiness had felt like a stolen season, precious but temporary. Here, back in the world they'd have to face tomorrow. It felt like something else, a decision, a declaration, a flag planted in hostile ground that said, "We choose joy. We choose each other. We choose to build rather than break." The wooden bird on the mantel caught moonlight through the window, wings forever spread toward flight. But Eleanor no longer envied its freedom. She'd found her own, not in running but in staying, not in solitude but in connection, not in perfection but in the beautiful, broken, mended wholeness of the life they were building day by day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the bank, the town, the weight of reputation and respectability. But tonight, surrounded by her family in their snow-wrapped sanctuary, Eleanor McCrae felt rich beyond measure. Some storms you weathered, others you learned to dance in, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone to dance with you. The shot rang out just after dawn, echoing across the frost-brittle landscape. Abel was already moving before the sound faded, rifle in hand, Eleanor right behind him with Hope clutched protectively. Through the kitchen window, they saw him, Caleb Sullivan, collapsed against their barn wall, dark stains spreading across his shirt. "Stay inside," Abel commanded, but Eleanor was already pushing past him. "He's hurt," she thrust Hope into Abel's arms. "Watch her. I need hot water, bandages. Eleanor, if someone tracked him here, then they'll find a woman tending wounds. Nothing more." Her eyes blazed with determination. "I won't let him die on our doorstep." Abel scanned the horizon. No dust, no riders. Not yet. He made his decision. "Get him inside, quickly." Together they half-carried, half-dragged Caleb into the house. He was conscious but barely, skin gray beneath his weather-beaten tan, breathing shallow. The bullet had taken him high in the chest, missing the heart but doing damage enough. "Knew you'd be good together," Caleb managed as they laid him on the kitchen table. "Saw smoke from your chimney? Had to check. Save your strength," Eleanor said, already cutting away his shirt. The wound was bad but not immediately fatal. If infection didn't set in, if the bleeding could be stopped, if no one came looking. Too many ifs. Abel stood guard at the window while Eleanor worked with steady hands, all those months of frontier living having taught her rough medicine. She cleaned the wound, packed it with whiskey-soaked cloth, bound it tight. Caleb groaned but stayed conscious, eyes fixed on her face with something like peace. "Should have stayed away," he whispered when she finished, "but wanted to see you were happy." "We are," Eleanor said firmly. "Thanks to you, now rest." They moved him to the small back room, the one that had been Eleanor's during those first awkward months. Abel helped settle him on the narrow bed, noting the fever already building, the tremor in hands that had once been rock-steady. "Who shot you?" Abel asked quietly. "Bounty hunter, young kid, out of Texas, lost him, in the storm." Caleb's eyes drifted shut. Maybe, maybe not. By evening, Caleb was burning with fever, muttering fragments of memory. The war, prison camps, names of dead men. Eleanor bathed his face with cool cloths while Abel kept watch, but no riders appeared. Hope, sensing the tension, stayed unusually quiet, playing with her blocks near Eleanor's feet. "We should fetch Doc Hartwell," Eleanor said as night fell. "Too risky. Word would spread." Abel checked his rifle for the dozenth time. "We handle this ourselves, or he dies." Eleanor's voice was flat. "I won't have it. Abel, not after everything. And if Crawford returns, if that bounty hunter tracks him here, we harbor a known fugitive. We harbor a man who saved my life, who made our family possible." She met his gaze steadily. "Some debts transcend law." Abel studied his wife, this woman who'd survived assault, childbirth, and condemnation to stand fierce and unbroken in their lamp-lit kitchen. "All right, but I go alone. You bar the door behind me. And if anyone but me or Doc comes, I know how to use a shotgun now." She touched his face gently. "Be careful." The ride to town through winter darkness felt endless. Abel found Doc Hartwell at home, whiskey in hand, medical bag always within reach. The old man asked no questions when Abel said someone needed help. Just gathered his supplies and followed. Only when they were treating Caleb did Hartwell speak. "Sullivan, isn't it? The one Crawford was hunting?" Abel tensed, but the doctor continued working, extracting the bullet with practiced skill. "Relax, son. I've patched up worse men for better reasons and better men for worse reasons. My job's healing, not judging." They worked through the night, Eleanor assisting with steady competence. By dawn, Caleb's fever had broken, breathing easier, color marginally improved. Hartwell packed his instruments, accepted the coffee Eleanor offered. "He'll live, most likely. Keep the wound clean. Watch for infection." The doctor paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mrs. McCrae. I never believed the ugly talk. Man who'd save a woman in distress. Ask nothing in return. That's rare honor in this territory." After he left, promising discretion, they collapsed at the kitchen table. Hope, who'd slept through the crisis, woke demanding breakfast with imperious cries. "Normal life continues," Eleanor murmured, preparing porridge one-handed while holding their daughter. "Even with outlaws bleeding in our back room, our life was never normal." Abel pointed out, "Why start now?" Caleb improved slowly. Conscious periods grew longer. Fever retreated. Wound began healing cleanly. Eleanor tended him with the same practical compassion she'd shown everything else. No fuss, no sentiment, just steady care. Abel found himself studying this man who'd played such a pivotal role in their lives. Scarred, graying, but with eyes that held depths of pain and wisdom. "Why'd you come back?" Abel asked one evening while Eleanor was putting Hope to bed. Caleb considered. "Been running 3 years, maybe longer, if you count running from myself. But when I heard Sullivan was spotted here again, knew I was bringing danger to her door. Had to warn you, or..." He shifted painfully. "Or maybe I was just tired. Wanted to stop running where someone might mourn me. Eleanor would mourn you. She mourns the man who saved her. Not sure that man exists outside that winter in the mountains." Caleb stared at the ceiling. "I did rob that bank. Did kill that guard. He was 19, reaching for his gun. I was faster." Abel said nothing. Waiting. "Bank was foreclosing on half the county. Families I knew from before the war, losing everything to Eastern money. Thought I was playing Robin Hood." Caleb's laugh was bitter. "Turns out I was just another killer with excuses. You saved Eleanor, gave her back to me. That counts for something. Does it? One good deed against a lifetime of bad ones." Caleb turned his head, studying Abel. "You're a good man, McCrae. Better than I ever was. Take care of them." "I will." "No, I mean..." Caleb struggled to sit up. "If that bounty hunter finds me here, if the law comes, you don't know me. You found a stranger shot, dying, took Christian pity. Nothing more. Promise me. Caleb, promise me." His urgency was palpable. "I've cost enough people enough pain. Won't add you to the list." Abel promised, though the words tasted like ash. 3 days later, the bounty hunter arrived. He was young, as Caleb had said, maybe 22, all swagger and fresh-pressed authority. He rode up bold as brass, introduced himself as Jake Thornton out of Austin, tracking a dangerous fugitive. "Heard there was a doctor called out this way few nights back," Thornton said. "Eyes scanning their property. Someone hurt bad enough to need tending. Ranch hand got kicked by a horse." Abel lied smoothly. "Doc patched him up, sent him on his way. Mind if I talk to this ranch hand?" "Would if I could. He lit out yesterday, heading for Mexico. Seemed in an awful hurry." Abel kept his stance easy, though every muscle was coiled. "You're welcome to water your horse, but that's all the help I can offer." Thornton's eyes narrowed. Funny how folks in these parts all seem to have ranch hands heading for Mexico, almost like someone's coaching their stories. Eleanor appeared on the porch, Hope on her hip. "Mr. McCrae, should I set another place for supper?" The bounty hunter's attention shifted, taking in Eleanor's beauty, the baby, the domestic scene. His expression grew calculating. "That's mighty kind, ma'am. Don't mind if I do." Throughout the meal, Thornton probed with questions disguised as conversation. Where were they from? How long married? Wasn't it hard, living so isolated? Eleanor deflected with a skill born of necessity, feeding Hope, discussing the weather, playing the simple rancher's wife to perfection. After dinner, Thornton made his move. "Mrs. McCrae, that's a beautiful baby. Yours?" "Of course." Eleanor's voice stayed level. "Funny thing, fellow I'm tracking supposedly helped a woman with a baby about that age. Some say he might even be the father." Abel stood slowly. "Mister, you just ate at my table. Now you're insulting my wife. Time you moved on." "Just making conversation." Thornton's hand drifted toward his gun. "Unless you got something to hide?" The moment stretched taut. Then Hope, with a baby's perfect timing. Projectile vomited all over Thornton's vest. The bounty hunter leapt back, cursing, while Eleanor apologized profusely, dabbing at his clothes with a towel, all maternal fluster. "So sorry. She does that sometimes. Too much excitement. Let me— Oh dear, that won't come out easily. Abel, fetch Mr. Thornton a clean shirt from your things." In the confusion of cleaning up, changing clothes, and Eleanor's continued apologies, the tension deflated. Thornton left shortly after, still suspicious but thrown off balance. They watched him ride away, then exhaled collectively. "Quick thinking," Abel murmured to Eleanor. "I may have fed Hope extra milk before dinner." She admitted, "Just in case we needed a distraction." From the back room came a sound they hadn't heard, Caleb laughing, weak but genuine. "Woman's got more grit than half the soldiers I served with." He called, but they knew Thornton would be back. That night, they held council in Caleb's room. "I need to leave," Caleb said. "Soon as I can ride, draw him off." "You can barely walk," Eleanor protested. "You wouldn't make it 5 miles. "Better than bringing the law down on you." He looked between them. "You've built something good here. Won't let my past destroy it." "Our past," Eleanor corrected firmly. "Our choices, our consequences. We face them together." Abel felt his heart swell with pride at his wife's fierce loyalty. But he also knew the practical truth. "Thornton's not going away. Neither is the price on your head. We need a better plan than just hoping." They talked through options, Caleb leaving, them leaving, trying to wait Thornton out. Each path led to loss or capture. Finally, Hope's crying interrupted, and Eleanor went to tend her. "Alone with Caleb?" Abel asked. "That money from the bank, what happened to it?" Caleb's smile was rueful. "Distributed most of it to families facing foreclosure. Kept enough to run on." "Why?" "Because a man who gives away stolen money isn't just a thief." Abel made a decision. "You're going to turn yourself in." "What?" "Not to Thornton. To a federal marshal, Crawford. If we can find him. Tell your story, the war, the foreclosures, everything. With Doc Hartwell testifying to your character, Eleanor to your actions saving her." Abel shrugged. "Might get prison instead of hanging. Might even find a judge who remembers the war. Understands what it did to men. That's a fool's hope." "Maybe, but fool's hope beats no hope." Caleb was quiet a long moment. Then, "I'd need to write some letters first. People who should know. What became of me? We'll help, Abel promised. The next morning brought unexpected allies. Joaquin arrived with his brother Miguel, both armed. Saw that bounty hunter in town. Joaquin explained, asking questions. Thought you might need extra hands. Before Abel could respond, more riders appeared. Widow Martinez with her 2 grown sons, Doc Hartwell, even Tom Morrison looking shamefaced but determined. Heard there might be trouble, Morrison said gruffly. Martha, my wife, she's been at me about how we treated you folks. Says real Christians help their neighbors, not judge them. So, here we are. Eleanor appeared on the porch, taking in the gathering crowd. Thank you, she said simply, and several of the men had to clear their throats and look away. They formed a plan. When Thornton returned, and he would, he'd find not just the McCraes but half the town ready to vouch for their character, their story of an injured stranger nursed from Christian charity. Meanwhile, Doc Hartwell would telegraph Crawford, arrange a proper surrender. Thornton came at noon, this time with backup, 2 rough-looking men who stayed mounted while he approached the house. He stopped short at the sight of so many people casually working around the ranch. McCrae, he called. Need to search your property. Official business. Got a warrant? Abel asked mildly. Don't need one for pursuing fugitives. Maybe not, said a familiar voice. But you need one to harass law-abiding citizens. Marshal Crawford stepped from behind the barn, badge glinting, hand resting easy on his pistol. Thornton, isn't it? Out of Austin? Bit far from your jurisdiction. Federal warrant. Thornton sputtered. I got rights. You got nothing but a bad attitude and worse manners. Crawford's voice was steel. Sullivan already surrendered. To me. He's in my custody, waiting transport for trial. It was almost true. Would be true within the hour. Thornton's face went red, then white. You can't. He's worth $500. Blood money, Crawford said dismissively. Now get off this property before I arrest you for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and irritating me on a fine December day. Thornton looked around at the assembled townspeople, at Crawford's steady authority, at the McCraes standing united on their porch. He spat in the dirt, wheeled his horse, and rode off with his companions, dust and fury in his wake. He'll make trouble, Morrison warned. Let him try. Crawford said. Then, to Abel, where is he? They brought Crawford to Caleb, who was sitting up in bed, freshly shaved, wearing Abel's clean shirt. The 2 men studied each other, lawman and outlaw, both shaped by war and loss. Caleb Sullivan, Crawford said formally. You're under arrest for bank robbery and murder. You'll get a fair trial, which is more than some would give you. I know, Caleb said quietly. I'm ready. They gave him time to finish his letters, to say goodbye properly. Eleanor wept openly as she embraced him, whispering thanks that needed no words. Even Hope seemed to understand, patting his face with chubby hands. Take care of them, Caleb told Abel. They're your redemption? Same as they were mine. I will, Abel promised. Always. Crawford allowed Caleb to walk out under his own power, dignity intact despite the shackles. The assembled townspeople watched in respectful silence as he climbed into Crawford's wagon. Before leaving, Crawford pulled Abel aside. He'll likely get 20 years instead of the rope. Showed remorse, returned most of the money, has witnesses to his character. Man might even live to see freedom again. Thank you, Abel said, meaning more than just this moment. Crawford touched his hat. Sometimes the law serves justice. Sometimes justice serves the law. Took me years to learn the difference. He glanced at Eleanor and Hope. You've got a fine family. McCrae, a lot of folks could learn from your example. As the wagon rolled away, Caleb turned for one last look. He raised his shackled hands in farewell, to Eleanor who'd given him purpose, to Hope who'd given him hope, to Abel who'd given him dignity in defeat. Then he faced forward, toward whatever justice awaited. The townspeople dispersed slowly, many stopping to speak with the McCraes. Awkward apologies, Offers of help, admissions of wrong. The tide had turned. Caleb's sacrifice shifting something fundamental in how perdition saw this small family. That night, as Hope slept and the house settled into quiet, Eleanor and Abel sat by the fire, processing all that had transpired. "He saved us again," Eleanor said softly. "Gave himself up to protect us." "He saved himself too," Abel pointed out. "Man can't run forever. Now at least he has a chance at redemption." Eleanor retrieved the wooden bird from the mantel, running her fingers over its spread wings. "Do you think he'll survive prison? He survived war, survived guilt, survived alone in the mountains. He'll survive this too." Abel pulled her close. "And when he gets out, if he gets out, he'll have somewhere to come home to." "Home," Eleanor repeated, the word carrying new weight. Not just a place, but a promise. Not just shelter, but sanctuary. Not just for them, but for all who needed grace. Outside, winter winds sang through the cottonwoods, carrying away the last echoes of gunshots and accusations. Inside, the McCrae family held each other close, bonded by more than blood, by choice, by courage, by the hard-won understanding that redemption comes not from running but from standing firm, together, against whatever storms might come. The wooden bird watched from the mantel, wings forever spread, no longer a symbol of escape, but of the freedom found in staying, in facing truth, in choosing love over fear. And in the small ranch house at the edge of the desert, 3 souls who'd found each other against all odds settled into sleep, complete at last in their imperfect, perfect whole. Easter Sunday dawned clear and bright, the desert blooming with unexpected color after spring rains. Eleanor stood before the mirror in their bedroom, pinning up her hair with steady hands. Though her heart raced, today would be their first return to church since Caleb's arrest 4 months ago, their first real test of whether perdition's change of heart would hold. "You look beautiful," Abel said from the doorway, already dressed in his Sunday best. He crossed to her, offering a small box. "Thought you might wear this." Inside lay a simple silver cross on a chain, not expensive, but polished bright. Eleanor's eyes misted. "Abel. Bought it from the traveling merchant last week." He fastened it around her neck, fingers gentle against her skin. "Figured if we're making a statement, might as well make it clear." Hope toddled in, walking now, into everything, chattering in a mix of real words and baby gibberish. Eleanor scooped her up, smoothing the yellow dress she'd sewn from fabric the church women had sent, an unexpected peace offering. "Mama pretty," Hope declared, patting Eleanor's cheek. "Yes, she is," Abel agreed, kissing them both. "My beautiful girls." The ride to town felt both endless and too quick. Eleanor's hands tightened on Hope as they approached the church, where families were already gathering. The first test came immediately. Mrs. Hutchins, queen of gossip, standing directly in their path. Eleanor lifted her chin, prepared for battle. But Martha Hutchins surprised her, stepping forward with something like humility in her weathered face. "Eleanor," she said, using her given name for the first time, "that dress looks lovely on Hope. The color suits her." A pause. Then, "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I was unchristian in my judgment." Eleanor nearly dropped Hope in shock. "Mrs. Hutchins, Martha, please." The older woman's voice roughened. "I've been thinking, these past months, about casting stones and beams in eyes and such. Would you sit with me today? I'd be honored." Abel's hand found Eleanor's back, steady and supporting. "That's kind of you, Martha," Eleanor managed. "We'd be glad to." They entered the church together, the McCraes and Martha Hutchins, who'd led the campaign against them. The congregation's whispers weren't hostile this time, but wondering, watching this unexpected alliance. Other shifts became apparent. Tom Morrison nodding greeting, Doc Hartwell saving seats, the Hernandez family smiling warmly. Reverend Morse's sermon took for its text the woman at the well, the Samaritan with her complicated past whom Jesus treated with compassion. His eyes found Eleanor's throughout, and she realized this was his apology, his acknowledgement delivered in the language he knew best. After service, the real transformation showed. Families approached with invitations. Would Hope like to play with their children? Would Eleanor join the church auxiliary? Would Abel consider running for the school board? It's overwhelming, Eleanor confessed to Abel as they accepted congratulations on Hope's baptism scheduling. 4 months ago, these same people change, Abel said simply. Sometimes they just need someone else to go first. That someone, Eleanor realized, had been Caleb. His surrender, his dignity in chains, had forced the town to see beyond their assumptions. In trying to destroy the McCrays, he'd saved them instead. As they prepared to leave, a young woman Eleanor didn't recognize approached hesitantly. She was pretty but worn, carrying an infant, no wedding ring visible. "Mrs. McCray," she said quietly. "I'm Sarah Dalton. I just arrived in town. I heard, that is, someone said you might understand about difficult circumstances." Eleanor read the story in the girl's hunched shoulders, her protective grip on her baby, her eyes that expected rejection. Without hesitation, Eleanor took her arm. "I do understand," she said gently. "This is my husband Abel and our daughter Hope. Why don't you come to Sunday dinner? We'd love the company." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't impose." "Nonsense," Abel said firmly. "Eleanor makes enough food for an army. You'd be doing us a favor." As they walked to the wagons, Eleanor caught Martha Hutchins watching. The older woman gave a small nod. Approval, understanding, perhaps even pride. Eleanor nodded back, and something settled between them. A new alliance in the making. The dinner was lively. Hope showing off for baby James. Sarah slowly relaxing as she shared her story. A promised marriage that never came. Family that cast her out. A desperate journey west seeking new chances. Eleanor and Abel exchanged glances, remembering their own desperate journeys. "There's work in town if you're willing," Abel offered. "Morrison needs help at the store, and the boarding house needs a cook. Respectable positions. But with the baby, and no husband, you'll have friends," Eleanor said firmly. "People who understand that circumstances don't define character. It won't be easy, but you won't be alone." Sarah wept then, months of fear and loneliness breaking like a dam. Eleanor held her while Abel distracted the children, and Hope patted Sarah's knee with solemn sympathy. That evening, after seeing Sarah settled at the boarding house with promises to check on her tomorrow, the McCrays sat on their porch watching sunset paint the desert gold and crimson. "We're becoming what we needed," Eleanor said softly. "A refuge for the rejected." "Fitting," Abel replied. "Considering how we started." Hope played between them, babbling to her doll about new friend and baby James. The wooden bird caught the light from its place on the porch rail, where Eleanor had moved it to watch over their expanding world. "I want to do more," Eleanor said suddenly. "That money from Crawford, we've kept it for Hope's education, but what if we used some of it differently? Start a fund for women like Sarah, like I was. Help them get established, find work, build lives without shame." Abel considered. "The New Mercy Fund? After your father's idea, the community he wanted to build." Eleanor turned to him. "We could make it real, Abel, not just for us, but for anyone who needs second chances. The town might not. The town will follow where we lead now. We've earned that." She took his hand. "Besides, what good is respectability if we don't use it to help others?" Abel brought her hand to his lips. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 times. Not nearly enough then." They were interrupted by hoofbeats, a rider approaching fast. Both tensed until they recognized Joaquin Hernandez, grinning broadly. "Senor Abel, a letter came from Colorado." Abel took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. Caleb's handwriting, rougher than before, but unmistakable. He read aloud, "Dear friends, they tell me writing letters is good for the soul, though mine's so patched up I'm not sure what's original anymore. 20 years, as Crawford predicted. Could be worse. I'm teaching letters to men who never had the chance to learn. Funny how things circle around. The warden's a fair man, says with good behavior. Might be out in 15. I'm planning on it. Man needs hope, even in a cage, especially in a cage. Tell Hope her bird, Papa. That's what I've decided I am. Every child needs multiple fathers, don't they? Thinks of her daily. I'm carving her a whole flock. By the time I'm free, she'll have enough for her own migration. Eleanor, you saved me as much as I saved you. Remember that when the dark days come. Abel, you're the man I might have been with better choices. Take care of our girls. Don't write back. Let me imagine you all happy and thriving. That's the picture I need. Until we meet again. And we will. Caleb. Eleanor wept openly. Abel cleared his throat several times. Even Hope seemed to sense the moment's weight, climbing into Eleanor's lap with rare quietness. 15 years, Eleanor whispered. He'll be nearly 60, and he'll have a home waiting. Abel said firmly, the foreman's cottage is sturdy. Could fix it up nice. You'd hire an ex-convict as foreman? I'd hire family. That night, as Hope finally succumbed to sleep after 3 stories and 2 songs, Eleanor and Abel made love with profound tenderness. Their bodies knew each other now, where to touch, how to move, when to be gentle and when passion could run free. But more than physical knowledge, they'd achieved something rarer, complete trust, absolute acceptance, love that encompassed all their broken pieces and sharp edges. Afterward, Eleanor traced lazy patterns on Abel's chest. Do you think we'll still feel this way in 15 years, when we're gray and worn? I think, Abel said slowly, that we'll feel it even more. Love's like water in the desert. The longer you go without, the more precious it becomes when you find it. Speaking of finding things, Eleanor smiled against his skin. I think Hope might have a brother or sister by Christmas. Abel went still. You're sure? As sure as a woman can be this early? She lifted up to see his face. Are you happy? Happy? He rolled her beneath him, kissing her deeply. There aren't words. Eleanor, a child that's ours from the start, that we made together. Hope's ours too, Eleanor reminded him. Of course she is, but this is proof that beautiful things can come from our love. Another miracle. They lay entwined, planning quietly, names, preparations, dreams for this new life. Outside, coyotes sang to the stars, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. The next months passed in a blur of growth. Sarah Dalton found her footing, becoming Eleanor's closest friend and fiercest ally in establishing the New Mercy Fund. 3 more women arrived seeking help, a widow with children, a girl fleeing forced marriage, a former saloon worker seeking different life. The fund helped them all. And the town, following the McCrae's lead, slowly opened doors that had been barred. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body remembering the rhythms even as her heart held none of the old fear. Abel was tender to the point of comedy, trying to carry her places until she threatened to box his ears. Hope appointed herself guardian of Baby, patting Eleanor's growing belly and sharing important toddler wisdom. The harvest came good that year, debts paid, future secured. Abel expanded the ranch, hiring men others wouldn't, Mexicans, former soldiers, drifters seeking honest work. The McCrae spread became known as a place where past mattered less than present effort. On a crisp November night, Eleanor's labor began. Doc Hartwell arrived quickly, Sarah assisting with calm competence. Abel paced the main room, Hope on his hip asking, "Where, baby?" every few minutes. "Soon, little bird." He told her, "Soon." The baby came with the dawn, a son, healthy and loud, with Abel's stubborn chin and Eleanor's dark hair. They named him Samuel, for Abel's lost brother, and James, for the marshal who'd chosen mercy. "He's perfect," Eleanor whispered, exhausted but radiant. "They both are," Abel said, Hope peering at her brother with fascinated suspicion. As the sun climbed higher, painting their room gold, the McCrae family settled into their new configuration. 4 now instead of 3, but still bound by the same threads. Choice, courage, and love hard won from sorrow. Eleanor looked at her husband, her children, the life they'd built from fragments and faith. "No more running," she said softly. "No more running," Abel agreed. "Only forward, together." Hope with toddler wisdom summed it up best. "Home," she announced, patting each family member in turn. "All home." And they were, despite the odds, because of the journey. Through grace and grit and the kindness of unlikely angels, they were home. The wooden bird watched from the mantel, wings spread not in flight but in blessing, over a family that had learned the hardest truth. Sometimes the greatest adventures aren't in the leaving but in the staying, not in perfection but in the beautiful, broken, mended wholeness of lives lived fully, honestly, together. In the distance, church bells rang out over perdition. No longer judgment but invitation. The McCrae family listened to their song, complete in their imperfection, rich in all that mattered, proof that love could indeed conquer all, not easily, not without scars, but absolutely, eternally, and true. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this tale of Eleanor and Abel touched your heart, please subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories that explore the courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Share what moved you most about their journey. Was it Eleanor's strength, Abel's steadfastness, or perhaps Caleb's sacrifice? Your comments create our community, and I read every single one. Until our next adventure in the Wild West, keep believing in the power of love and redemption.